Before I get started about talking about the existence of God, I need to start telling you about the definition of God. The first point I want to make about the definition of God is that God is not equal to gods. And what I mean by that is not that, one is usually capitalized and the other is not, or that one is singular and one is plural. They're actually very different. Um, I'll give you an example here. If you look at the Greek god Zeus, Zeus actually isn't the highest god in the Greek mythology. There were other beings that kind of popped into existence before Zeus and eventually created Zeus. A couple of those that I've found online are like entities like darkness and love popped into existence. There's some others as well. Um, and then there's also the Norse gods, where you have Odin. And Odin's not the first highest god either. In Norse mythology, there are like two elemental forces of fire and ice, and when they came together, the fire would melt the ice, and the melted ice would create life. All right. The reason I want to point this out to you is that when I talk about the God that Christians believe in, we're talking about a being that is more like the elemental forces than Zeus or Odin. God is very different from them. All right, so I'm going to list out some things about the nature of God. This is not exhaustive, but there's some important points. God is the uncreated creator of all things. God doesn't have a shape or a body of any type. God is everywhere. God is not just everywhere where a part of him is in this place and another part of him is in that place, but God is, every part of God is everywhere, and every part of God is also in every time. God does not change, and God does not change in the most absolute sense, because God doesn't exist in time. God is supremely simple in being. Something that's simple is like fire. Something that's complex is like a person, a human being. But God isn't. Fire, though simple, it still has some complexity to it, but God is supremely simple. Another detail is the essence of God is his existence. In human nature, right? Our nature and our existence are two different things, but God's nature is God's existence. Another point is that God needs absolutely nothing. Nothing came before God, and what God does is not out of necessity. It's not out of need. It's out of God's free will, and God is the most free of beings. God has intelligence, knowledge, and wisdom, and God acts with deliberate intent. So, some people have asked me about, well, in the story of Adam and Eve, doesn't it say that God created Adam and Eve in his own image and likeness, right? So that makes us think that maybe God looks like a man. But that is actually not the case. According to the Catholic Church, the story of creation in the book of Genesis is figurative speech describing events that had actually happened. So in the case of God making Adam and Eve in his own image and likeness, that's figurative speech, not literal human being beyond the edge of the universe. All right, so I'll give you an example. This is from the book of Acts. St. Paul, was talking to some Greek philosophers, and he had just seen all the statues of the gods that the Greeks had made, and he noticed that one of them without a statue was shrined to like an unknown god. So this is what he said to him: "The God who made the world and all that is in it, the Lord of heaven and earth, does not dwell in sanctuaries made by human hands, nor is he served by human hands because he needs anything. Rather, it is he who gives to everyone life and breath and everything. Since therefore we are the offspring of God, we ought not to think of the divinity is like an image fashioned from gold, silver, or stone by human art and imagination." So basically, what St. Paul understood, you have to be in his position, right? At his time, he grew up with the teaching that we should never make images of God, and Paul interpreted that to mean that there's no image that can accurately represent God, and that means that God does not even look like a human. God, Paul interpreted the story in the book of Genesis figuratively. So, to give you another example, I'm going to talk about the name of God. There's a passage in the Bible where God actually gives his most formal name. This was at the time of Moses, and if you remember the story of Moses, God called Moses to free the Jews from the Egyptians by sending plagues. And this part that I'm going to read to you is from the time of Moses, when God initially came to him and told him that he must go to the Jews and tell them that God is going to free them. So this is what this is what Moses said. "But," said Moses to God, "if I go to the Israelites and say to them, 'The God of your ancestors has sent me to you,' and they ask me, 'What is his name?' what do I tell them?" God replied to Moses, "I am who I am." Then he added, "This is what you will tell the Israelites: 'I am sent me to you.'" All right, so this from way back from the time of Moses is understood as the name of God. The name of God is I am. I am the one who is. In the actual language, that the name I am sounds like Yahweh. All right. So Yahweh is the name of God. Some people have misinterpreted that as meaning Jehovah is the name of God, but what had actually happened is the Jews had to be very careful about not saying the name of God in vain. So out of respect, when they wrote God's name in Scripture, they would write it with all the vowels missing. And when you remove the vowels from that name, it actually reads Jehovah, and that's where that mistake came in. God's name is not Jehovah; it's a Yahweh. But also, besides that, it's interesting to note that the Jews, whenever God's name was mentioned elsewhere in Scripture, they'd replace it with the word Lord. And today, when you look at when you read a Bible and you see the word Lord, that's kind of like in all capitals letters, where the second three letters, the last three letters are capitalized, but sort of smaller size font, but still capitalized. Whenever you see that, that means it's referring to the literal name Yahweh, but it's out of respect. It's using Lord instead. The word I am actually hints that God's essence is his existence, right? He's the one who is, the one who exists. The word I am is also kind of refusal to give a name, right? It hints that God is not like anything in nature. All right, so that's overall what we mean by God. And so in part 2, I explained to you how we can know that God exists.